We will be in 1 Peter chapter 3 tonight. Really appreciate those of you that have been here for each lesson and have kind of kept through this study here in 1 Peter. If you are joining us for the first time, let me just say that really all we're doing this week is a Bible study, and we're going through this great letter that Peter wrote. And I'll remind you that the way Peter frames the letter at the end of the letter, chapter 5, verse 12, he writes these words, "Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it." You know, that idea that Peter was testifying that there was a true grace of God and that this, what he wrote, was the true grace, implies that there are some people, there were already people in his day, but there always will be people who will present false graces. And I really believe that the way false grace is preached sounds a little bit like this. Hey, the grace of God in your life is simply forgiveness. God will forgive your sins. And it doesn't really matter how much you do or how many you commit or whether or not you decide to change very much about your life. God's grace will always take care of that. I mean, that sounds so nice, and I do believe that the Bible teaches forgiveness, especially for those that seek God and have faith in Him and continually pursue Him. But the grace of God is bigger than that. It's not just what we were saved from, it was what we were saved for. It was not just that God would erase our past, but that God would give us a future. And a lot about what we were saved for and the future of our life after we were baptized and forgiven by God is not easy. That's why he has to say, stand firm in it. A lot of people want to run from that responsibility. We don't want to be, like we studied in chapter 1, we don't want to be the born again people. Being born again implies that we've got to love each other fervently from the heart. And I don't know that I want to always do that with God's people. Being born again means that we've got to be holy as He is holy and imitate Him. I don't know that I want to be that as a child of God. People sometimes want to run from the responsibility and the gift of being the children of God. In chapter 2, we talked about our new identity. That we are living stones being built on the chief cornerstone that was rejected. That we are priests and ministers proclaiming the excellencies of God, keeping our behavior excellent among the nations. And a lot of people want to run from that. I want the grace of God to let me off the hook so that I don't have to serve that way or live that way or talk that way. But it is a gift, a grace, that we get to be the children of God like this. And Peter, I think, keeps trying to change our mind about this. So last night we talked about chapter 2, verse 13 through about chapter 3, verse 7. And you remember the repeated word? Submit. Submit to the difficult things, whether that's the government or whether that's your workplace or being a slave of a master, whether that's a marriage that's difficult, submit. Well, why? Because that's the model Jesus left us. He submitted to His own suffering, and by His stripes, by His wounds, we were what? We were healed. You know, it's a great responsibility and privilege to help other people find healing. But the only way sometimes for people to learn how to be healed is for us to take the wounds and for us to submit to the difficulty. We're kind of picking up in that same idea here. We're going to look at chapter 3, verse 8 through about chapter 4, verse 6, and maybe a little bit chapter 4, verse 12 and beyond a little bit. But I'm titling this lesson, The True Grace of Suffering, which doesn't sound right, does it? The true, unmerited gift of suffering. But think about it just for a minute. Do it this way. I want you to think about a time in your life where you grew spiritually the most. Where when you look back on your life, you realize that that period of your life is when you got closest to God, you grew the most, you became stronger, more faithful. And here's my question. Was it a time of ease in your life that you're thinking of? Or was it a time where things were very difficult? and you actually were going through periods of grief or suffering or trauma or difficulty. And wouldn't you now, looking back on that, say that might have been one of the most important gifts God ever gave you? Was, I would say for me, it was the death of my mom. I guarantee you that had it not been for my mom passing away when I was 10 years old, I probably wouldn't be standing here today speaking about how good God is. Because everything I learned about the goodness of God, I learned when I didn't know where else to turn. And I look at some of those things in my life as some of the greatest blessings, as difficult as they were. Would you agree that sometimes suffering is a blessing? Let me show you the idea in this text just in some verses, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the concept. Look at chapter 3, verse 8. So to sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called for this very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing. Notice that the call here is to not respond in kind when people are unkind. Verse 9, they're doing evil, they're insulting us, but we need to give them a blessing. Well, why? Look down at verse 14. Verse 14 says, but even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are what? Blessed. Most people don't think that. I've struggled in my life, especially as a younger Christian, to think that when people did what this verse says, that I suffered for doing what was right, I didn't feel like that was a blessing. But he says it more than once. Go to chapter 4, verse 14. Chapter 4, verse 14. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are what? Blessed. Do Christians get reviled these days in our culture? Do you meet very many Christians that when they're reviled, they think, first thing they think, and the first thing they say is, what a blessing. I mean, what a blessing that we get reviled to be Christians. Look at verse 16, chapter 4, verse 16. If anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. Not only should we not see it as anything but a blessing, we shouldn't be ashamed when it happens. We should glorify God that it happens. And then finally, in chapter 4, verse 19. Therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. Over and over again in this section, if you suffer for the name of Christ, if you suffer for righteousness, it's a blessing. See it as a blessing. It's a gift from God. All right. Do you remember who preached like that? Like who said, long before Peter wrote words like this, that it would be a blessing, or that we would be blessed in things that sound a lot like suffering. Do you remember the Sermon on the Mount? You guys help me with this. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's comfortable, isn't it, being poor in spirit? Spiritual poverty, not having anything in your spiritual bank account that you can pay God off with. That's just such a comfortable place to be. No, that's difficult. What's the next one? Blessed are those who mourn. That's a great day, right? Like your days of mourning, those are comfortable days. Notice that everything Jesus was saying in the Sermon on the Mount was the same thing. Blessed are you when you struggle, hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are you when you show mercy to others and you're pure in heart and you're peacemakers. There's not anything comfortable about that. He ended that whole, heavenly octave of the 8 blessings with, blessed are you when men persecute you, say all kinds of evil against you falsely. The same concept. And we pointed some of this out yesterday. The Christians in the book of Acts, when they would suffer for the name of Christ, what would they do? They'd rejoice. Over and over again, the New Testament will teach this principle. It's a grace, it's a gift when we suffer. But let's try to make sense of it. Why? And to what end? Let's go back to chapter 3, and we'll read a little bit more in verse 8. To sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called for this very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing. 4. Now, I want you to listen close to this quote. I think it's interesting that this is a long quote from the Old Testament in the book of 1 Peter. It's one of the longest quotes. But listen close to it, and then we're going to talk about where it comes from and why I think it's valuable. The one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil, his lips from speaking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And then Peter asks this question, who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? All right, what's going on in this quote, and what's happening here? All right, in your Bible, if you've got a footnote, where's that come from? What psalm? Psalm 34. Go ahead and go back in your Bibles with me for a moment. We'll be in this for just a bit, and we'll come back to Peter, but I want you to see this. Psalm 34. I want you to notice at the top of your psalm there, the superscription of the psalm says, this is a psalm of David when he feigned madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. In 1 Samuel 21, there's a story of David in front of Achish, the king of Gath. He was a Philistine king. Now, in that superscription, when it says before Abimelech, Abimelech is a word for Philistine kings. It's like the word Pharaoh, but for the Philistines instead of the Egyptians. So David was in front of a Philistine king and Abimelech, Achish, the king of Gath. And the way he got out of a very difficult situation was he pretended to be crazy. He feigned madness. Do you guys remember that story? It was a very dark time for David, actually. If you go back to 1 Samuel 21, it's some of the first times you see David not acting like himself. He lies to the priests. He takes consecrated bread and eats it. Later, Jesus would say what David did on that occasion wasn't lawful. He goes to Achish, king of Gath. He's afraid for his life. And so what he starts doing is he starts drooling down his beard. And he acts like he's out of his mind. And he scribbles on the walls. And the king comes in and sees him and says, who's this crazy person? I got enough crazy people around here. Get him out of here. And David escapes because he acts like he's crazy. You know, David wrote 3 psalms on this occasion. Psalm 34, Psalm 56, and Psalm 142. This moment in David's life rocked him. Now, listen close to the psalm. I'm going to read it, and then I want to point out a couple of things about it, and then I want to explain why I think Peter uses it in his letter. Listen close to Psalm 34. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul will make its boast in the Lord. The humble will hear it and rejoice. O magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces will never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who desires life and loves length of days that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil, your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous. His ears are open to their cry, and the face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, But the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones. Not one of them is broken. Evil shall slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the soul of his servants, and none of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. Folks, that is a beautiful psalm in all kinds of ways. You might have noticed even the reference to Jesus in verse 20. In John 19, he'll reference that verse about how the bones of Jesus weren't broken on the cross. But did you catch, as David wrote these words, what he was feeling? Let me say something before I point it out. Some scholars over the years have doubted that superscription of the chapter. Here's their reasoning. They look at Psalm 34 and they say something like this. It doesn't make sense that David could write a psalm like this when the way that he was delivered was dishonest, ungodly, and cowardly. I mean, the way David got out of his mess is he lied. He pretended to be somebody else. He didn't boldly claim God. And so they actually will say and have said, I don't think David wrote that on that occasion. I think he did. But I think we're reading it wrong if what we think he's saying is, God, thank you for delivering me from Achish, king of Gath. That's not what he's saying. What did God deliver him from? Go back to verse 4. I sought the Lord and he answered me and delivered me from all my what? Fears. David was delivered from his fear, not from the king, but from his fear. What about verse 6? This afflicted man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his what? Troubles. Not the king, but his trouble. Go to verse 17. David's crying, and the Lord hears. Again, he speaks of his troubles. What is he speaking about in verse 18? A broken heart and being crushed in spirit. You see that? Let me tell you what I think happened with David. Before 1 Samuel 21, David had been anointed the king of Israel. Do you remember when he came in from his as a shepherd boy into his father's house, and Samuel dumped oil on his head and said, "You're the new king of Israel"? Do you know, if you look at those chapters from, I think it's like chapter 15 through chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, from that moment on, everything in David's life goes haywire. Nothing makes sense. He loses his brothers, he loses his family. Like the guy that is the true, or is actually the king that God's rejecting, starts persecuting him, trying to kill him. Nothing in David's life makes any sense. And you know what David does? He keeps doing the right thing. He keeps doing the right thing. Until one day, it just gets to be too much. And in 1 Samuel 21, it was just too much, and he didn't want to do it anymore. And he drooled down his beard, and he scribbled on the walls, and he broke his own heart. That's what he did. He broke his own heart. In fact, look at the first words of Psalm 34 again. I will bless the Lord, how often? At all times. His praise will what? Continually be in my mouth. Or in other words, you're never going to see me do that again. You're never going to see me deny who I am. You're never going to see me deny that I'm the Lord's anointed. You're never going to see me in fear cower to the threats of somebody. I'm not going to do that again. In fact, skip down now to verse 11 and look at verse 11 of the psalm. Come, you children, listen to me. I'll teach you the fear of the Lord, not the fear of Achish, not the fear of man. I'll teach you the fear of the Lord. What is it? Who's the man who loves or desires life and loves length of days that he may see good? Stop for just a minute. If I ask that question tonight, how many of you desire life? To love and see good days. You want to love and see good days and have a good life? Let me teach you. You ready? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Wait. I thought that if we were going to love life and see good days, we needed to avoid all difficulty, all persecution. I mean, wouldn't that be the way to love life and see good days? No. The way you love life and see good days is never be deceptive about who you are or whose you are. Don't break your own heart. All right, that's David in Psalm 34. And then Peter quotes verses 12 through 16 over here in 1 Peter 3. All right. Do you think Peter would have identified with what happened to David? Did Peter ever feign madness to deliver himself in a difficult situation? You remember it, don't you? The night Jesus was betrayed, he said to Peter, before this night is over, you're going to do what? Deny me. You're going to deny me. You're going to speak deceptive words. You're going to say things that aren't true. And you're going to break your own heart, Peter. And just like David, who wrote Psalm 34 and said, look, listen, I want to teach you all something. Don't do that. When life gets hard, don't pretend you're somebody else. Don't stoop to their level. Don't break your own heart and deny being the Lord's. Because David did it, then Peter did it in front of the soldiers' fire. And Jesus told him, after you've come back, you strengthen your brothers, just like David strengthened his brothers in writing Psalm 34. There's a connection here. And don't forget who Peter's writing to. Peter's writing to people whose lives are all upside down. They're aliens scattered. They're living under difficult government circumstances. They're slaves with evil masters. They're in difficult marriages. And you know what he says here? Don't break your own heart. If you want to love life and see good days, it's not going to be because you escape this problem. It's because in the problem, you're harmonious and kind, and you speak the truth, and you're not afraid. So go back to chapter 3 of 1 Peter, verse 13. Listen to the question. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? Man, that's such a good question. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? Let me answer it how a lot of modern day Christians answer that. Hey, church, you listening? Who is there to harm you if you guys keep preaching what's true? From this pulpit, you say, God says homosexuality is wrong. God says marriage is between a man and a woman. God says there are men and there are women. God says, and you keep saying what God says. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? You know what some churches have decided? The government could. They could come in and take away our tax exempt status, like we might end up being persecuted if we keep saying what's right. Ask a Christian in the workplace, if you're doing what's right, saying what's right, speaking the truth, who is there to harm you? Well, I could get fired. People might not like me. I mean, what do you mean who could harm me? Everybody could harm me. In fact, if you took this question back to David in front of Achish, king of Gath, and you said, David, who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good right now? He'd point at Achish. And he'd say, Achish could kill me. If you asked Peter in front of the soldiers' fire, who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? He'd say, the Jews, the Romans, they could put me on a cross next to Jesus. What do you mean, who could harm me? But what does the question really mean? What's the worst they could do to you? The worst they could do to you is take your life. But is that the worst thing for a Christian? For me, to live is Christ, Paul said, and to die is gain. Now watch what Peter does with this. The next thing he says in verse 14 is, even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. Do not fear their intimidation. Do not be troubled. Folks, I have failed verse 14 so many times. There have been so many times in my life as a Christian that I was afraid of the intimidation. I was afraid of those that were going to say things about me. I mean, this goes back to when I was young on the playground in elementary school, and I was trying to be the right kind of kid. And People were saying things about me not being like them. I was intimidated. I was troubled by it. And here the command is very simple. Don't do it. Don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated. Well, how do we do that? Verse 15. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. You know, it took me a little while to understand what was being said here. Do you know the way you stop being intimidated and stop being afraid of a culture that may insult you or persecute you or someday threaten your life? Do you know how you're not afraid? Is you take them off the throne of your heart and you put Christ as the Lord of your heart. Do you know why that's true? Because whoever rules your heart is who you fear. If I'm afraid of the government, it's because I believe that they're the most powerful thing. If I'm afraid of my spouse, go back to the earlier parts of chapter 3, then I think they're the most powerful thing. If I'm afraid of a master and I'm a slave, I believe they're the most powerful thing. But you know what? They're not. They're not the most powerful. You know who is? Jesus Christ. And if you want to not be afraid, sanctify him as Lord in your heart. Put him on the throne, and the fear will go away. And you'll be able to bless those who curse you. You'll be able to speak words of confidence and not deny who you are. And then something interesting will happen. Look at the rest of verse 15. Always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. You know what God wants to do with my life and your life? He wants to put us right in the middle of a very dark world who threatens, who persecutes, who speaks against. And he wants people to radiantly, because Jesus is on the throne of their heart, radiantly bless and not curse, radiantly do good, show hope, show peace, peace that passes understanding, do all things without grumbling and disputing. And he draws people to himself because people come and say, why are you hopeful? Why are you okay? Why are you happy? And then what are we ready to do? What's the verse say? Be ready to give an account, to give a defense for the hope that's in you. We've misused this verse, by the way. Have you guys ever heard this verse used for studies on apologetics? This is the word in the Greek for make an apology, give a defense. The verse does not say you need to be ready to give a defense to every evolutionist that asks you a question about creation. The verse doesn't say you need to be ready to give a defense to every fill-in-the-blank kind of question that people ask. You know what the verse says? Live your life in front of the world that when they come and ask you why you're hopeful, why you're kind, why you're radiant, why you're different, that you've got a reason to tell them. I have two stories to tell you about this. After my mom passed away when I was 10, my world became my friends in the neighborhood. Dad was grieving. In his own words, he was kind of crazy with his grief. He was 44, just lost his 42-year-old wife. He had 4 kids. And I was just a latchkey kid in the neighborhood. And so everybody that I was close to were all my buddies in the neighborhood. And that was fine when we were in 5th grade and 6th grade. But when we all went to 7th grade, we were 12 years old. Every one of those kids I was friends with, every one of them, to a kid, started doing drugs. Every one of them. They'd stop in the alley on the way to school and smoke marijuana. Every day they'd say, hey, you want to do this? And I'd say, no. I was afraid to do it because I knew what God said, that I knew that it would get me and take me away. And they would be so mean to me. Why are you such a coward? Why are you such a wimp? Why are you the way you are? You know, the day came where their marijuana within the first few months of 7th grade went from marijuana to shrooms to acid to rock cocaine. I remember the day one kid took rock cocaine out of his pocket. I walked away from that group of kids, and I knew I couldn't be around them anymore. But I was broken. I remember it was the first time I'd cried in a long time, and I just said to God, God, I don't have a mom, I don't have any friends, I can't talk to Dad, you just have to take care of me. And from the time I was about 12 years old until I got to high school, I wrestled with joy and peace and hope. But when I got to high school and I'd been trying to be in the Word of God and I'd been trying to follow the Lord, He really had given me joy. I really was at peace. And I really did have hope. And then a funny thing happened. God made me an evangelist. Do you know how He did it? He had one of those kids from years before come up to me and actually say something like this to me. Why are you happy? You should be so mad. I mean, life is so hard. How are you the way you are? It was 1 Peter 3:15. And you know, the only thing I knew to say was, God. I know God. And that kid said, I don't know what that means. And I said, well, why don't we look at it? Have you ever seen that before? Like a Christian who just really is a Christian. The good news is really good news to them. The things going on in the world don't rattle them. The joy, the peace that passes understanding, the kindness that they show to others that mistreat them is just real. And people begin to wonder about that. Let me tell you one more story about that. I preached in Los Angeles before I moved to Minnesota. And in that little church there at Lassen Street, this young lady came to worship with us. She had just graduated from Auburn, Alabama. Her name was Dana Mars. Not Dana Mars Carrozza, her niece. Some of you may know Dana Mars Carrozza, but Dana Mars is now Dana Wade. But she had graduated from Auburn and came to work at JPL. You know what that is? Jet Propulsion Labs. She was a rocket scientist. Brilliant young lady and a Christian. She was in her 20s. And that's when 9/11 happened, back in 2001. Dana was always at church. She was always faithful. And about 2 weeks after 9/11, she showed up and there was this young man sitting next to her, dressed really nice. I went up to him and I said, hey, my name's Andy. Who are you? He said, my name's Jamin Greenbaum. I said, well, what brought you here today? He said, I've never been in a church building in all my life. This is the first time I've ever been. I said, well, why are you here? Here's what he said. A couple weeks ago when 9/11 happened, I work with Dana over there at JPL. He said, I looked around the room at all the smartest people that I knew, all the people that I admired most in the world, all the people that I believed had the world figured out. And he said, when those planes flew into the buildings and when the world was on fire, he said, all of them lost their minds. Every one of them lost their minds. He said, and then I saw Dana. And she was appropriately sad about the whole thing. But it didn't take away her peace. And it didn't take away her hope. And he said, I want what she has. We've got this upside down. Dana didn't need to know how to answer every question that those rocket scientists could bring against God. Do you know what Dana needed to do? Live with hope and joy and kindness and not let the world rattle her. Jesus was Lord, sanctified on her heart. It wasn't about anything else going on in the world. And God was going to bring people to himself. If you don't think that's what this is about, keep reading. Let's look at what Peter says next. Verse 15, sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right, rather than for doing what is wrong. Okay. God says, look, I've got sort of this plan with you. You are going to be insulted. You are going to be ridiculed. They are going to come at you and they're going to say things about you, but you still be harmonious and joyful and hopeful and kind, returning good for evil, because one day it's going to put them to shame. Did this ever happen before? Verse 18. For Christ also died for sins once for all. Listen close to this language. The just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God. Man, that's rich, guys. Who died? The just. Who'd the just die for? The unjust. Look at the principle. When I'm living in the world trying to be the just, trying to be the righteous, trying to be the person that God wants me to be, and the unjust are harming me, insulting me, hurting me, trying to kill me, trying to make me die. They're doing the exact same thing to me that they did to Christ. But you know what Jesus did? He died for them, the just for the unjust. Was it a failure that he died? Keep reading. So that he might bring us to God, this is verse 18, for Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, same thing we want to do for others, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. In which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is one of the most difficult paragraphs in the New Testament. I'm not going to pretend it's not. Like when it talks about Jesus being put to death in the flesh, made alive in the Spirit, going and making proclamations to the spirits in prison, and all of that stuff. There have been so many different ways people have interpreted this through the centuries, and it's difficult. Every one of the explanations is difficult, and I'm not going to tell you I understand everything about it. But here's what I do want you to notice about it. When Jesus was put to death in the flesh, which is what the ungodly sometimes try to do to us, they try to put us to death in our flesh. They're unkind. Sometimes they even kill Christians. That does not mean that they kill our spirit. We can be made alive in the Spirit. And when Jesus was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, he went into whatever this spirit realm was, and he made a proclamation. Now, people interpret this different ways. Maybe he went to the souls that were lost in the flood. That's why it's talking about Noah, that were disobedient, and told them, look, I was victorious. Noah was right. Maybe he was speaking to the authorities and rulers, the angels, like verse 22 says, making proclamation that he really was the ruler. But notice the context. Jesus being ridiculed and killed and harmed was not failure. It was victory. And if we are ridiculed and we are harmed and we're put to death in the flesh but made alive in the Spirit, it's not failure. It's victory. Now, what I really like about this text is when he brings up the whole thing about Noah, he brings up baptism and points out how that picture of Noah and his salvation through water is the same picture of our salvation in the water of baptism. I told you earlier this week, I sometimes use this text for denominational people who really like talking about grace, but they don't like certain things about grace. What's great about doing this with them is by the time you get to chapter 3, they've so changed their mind about what the grace of God is, they almost never argue with this anymore. And they realize that baptism is not against grace, but it is grace. It's not a work of man, it's the salvation of God. And this text helps us understand that. But as complicated as this is, I want you to follow Peter's reasoning here. He's not done talking about this idea. Keep going in chapter 4, verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1. Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In all this they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation, and they malign you. Stop there for just a minute. Go through this language with me in chapter 4, verse 1. Hey, Christ suffered in the flesh. You guys, arm yourselves with the same purpose. That's like take up arms, take up something voluntarily. Take it up voluntarily. A lot of times when I read the book of 1 Peter, I think that suffering is about persecution. It's not here in this part of the text. This suffering of the Christian is not persecution. This suffering of the Christian is voluntarily giving up sin in their life. How hard was that for some of you? When you first became a Christian, how difficult was it for you to let go of, look at the list again in verse 3, pursuing sensuality. Was that hard for anybody? I mean, all your life you just gave into your senses. If you wanted to look at a video on the screen to please your senses with your pornography, how hard was that to give up? If you wanted to please your senses by just running off and being with other people, how hard was that to give up? If your social life was about getting together with other people and drinking and having parties and having a good time and enjoying yourself, how hard was that to give up? You watch new Christians. Do you know what the greatest suffering is at the beginning of their walk with Christ? It's the suffering that they voluntarily take up to cease from sin. It's hard to do. And then, do you know what happens next? Verse 5, or verse 4, in verse 4. This is what happens next. Every one of your friends that you used to party with, what do they start saying about you? You're crazy. What's wrong with you? What are you doing? They add persecution to the suffering of getting out of sin. But did you know this is a grace of God in your life? The getting rid of sin because Jesus died to sin, the persecution that comes when people think you're crazy for changing your life. Did you know that's a gift? Do you know why it's a gift? Look at verse 5. But they will give an account to him who's ready to judge the living and the dead. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. All right, this is really interesting to me. Peter says, look, all this time that they're harming you, all this time that they're saying bad things about you, go back to chapter 3, all these times that they're insulting you, you bless them, you say good to them, you show them hope, you show them kindness. You do it with gentleness and with reverence. Yeah, but Peter, they think I'm nuts. They think I'm crazy. I'm trying to get sin out of my life to be like Jesus Christ, and they keep telling me that I'm out of my mind. He says, yes, they do. But one day, what are they going to give in verse 5? What are they going to give? An account to him. All right, this is a really important question. Does that bring you comfort that someday all the people that persecuted you, all the people that insulted you, all the people that spoke against you, they're going to stand before God and they're going to give an account for what they've done? Does that comfort you? I don't think it's supposed to. You know what I think it's supposed to do? Is make you want to try to help them. Because someday they're going to give an account. don't miss this. Did he say something about giving an account already? Draw a line from 4:5 back to 3:15. What does it say in 3:15? We need to give an account to those that ask us for the reason of our hope. Why? Because in chapter 4, verse 5, they're going to give an account someday. And the only way that I'm ever going to help them give the right account before the God who's going to judge them is if I give the right account when they come at me saying, why are you different? Why are you like this? Why are you nuts? And I say, I'm not. I'm joyful and I'm happy. And you can't rattle me. And you can't steal anything from me. And the worst you could do is take my life. I love life and I see good days because I know who I am. One day they're going to give an account. Could I suggest to you that what the book of 1 Peter is an evangelism handbook? That's what it is. He wanted to teach Christians how they were going to win the world. And you know how they're going to win the world? It's not by running to every ungodly person you know and beating them up with all the things they're doing wrong. It's by in front of them removing all the things in our life that are wrong, keeping our behavior excellent, removing all the attitudes that harm them when they harm us, giving them a blessing instead of a curse, living with Jesus as the Lord of our hearts, no one else on the throne. They're not on the throne. President Trump's not on the throne. Whoever's in the next regime's not on the throne. I don't care who threatens us. They're not the ones ruling our life. God is. Jesus Christ is. And you can't take away my joy. And when they say you're crazy, you smile at them. And you say, no, I'm finally in my right mind. And you're invited. You're invited. Man, I wish I'd have known this much earlier. And I wish I could remember this every day. Because life gets hard to live in a world where people are maligning us. Life gets hard to live sometimes when everybody says you're out of your mind for living for the Lord. But God loved us enough, Jesus loved us enough, to be put to death in the flesh and made alive in the spirit and make proclamation that it was victory. And we can do the same thing every day with people. When they try to put us to death in our flesh, but the inner man's being renewed day by day, and we make proclamation that it's not failure, it's victory. We're going to win their hearts. God will win their hearts. We'll stop there tonight. We'll pick up here tomorrow. And the last lesson I'm going to preach, going through the rest of the book, is the true gift or the true grace of humility. You know, we're never going to be able to live the life I just described until our life doesn't matter so much to us anymore. And genuine humility is really what we have and what we practice. But we'll finish that tomorrow. I appreciate your attention. I hope something that was said tonight perhaps pricked your heart, made you think. The most important thing I want you to notice is that Jesus died for you. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. It was told to all of the spiritual realm and all of the people in the past that have been disobedient that he really is the Lord of heaven and earth, the conqueror. And if you haven't yet made him the Lord of your heart, sanctified him as the King in your heart, you can come to him today. Be baptized. You're saved by baptism in his blood. The waters of baptism will carry you across, just like it did Noah, wash away your sins. And if you haven't done that, come do that tonight while we stand and while we sing.